announced earlier this week, we are expanding our podcast, and starting today, we're going to be doing bi-monthly episodes only in English. We've met lots of people over the years, and we realized we can't really talk to them in Macedonian. So we decided to do it in English. For our first special English edition on the pod, we've got a special guest joining us all the way from Thailand. He's a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Macedonia, a graduate of the University of Virginia, a historian who currently teaches in Surat Thani, Thailand, and a very good friend of ours, Phil Pingeton. Welcome on the pod, Phil.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. It's a real honor to be the first English-speaking guest.
Well, considering how many Peace Corps volunteers have turned out over the years here in Macedonia, it's quite natural. So how is life going, Phil?
How's life? Well, I'm sort of holding my own here. I'm lucky to be still employed. I teach at an international school in Surat Thani, which is a town in like the south part of Thailand. And we're doing online courses, and I'm trying to do my best with it. It's no one was really kind of prepared for this, so it's been a struggle. The school year is almost over, actually, and in a few weeks I'll actually be moving because I got another job at another school in Thailand. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And do you teach any core subjects, or what exactly are you teaching there?
I teach English, math, and science. There's also like social studies, but social studies for grade 3 is like being a good citizen and, things like that. And it's very like American centric, and all of my kids in my class are Thai. And so it's not really a good curriculum for them. So I kind of weave in my social studies.
Yeah, so we've met when you were a Peace Corps volunteer in Macedonia a few years back. So let's start a conversation about that whole experience of yours. And I mean, our first question would be for those that are listening and don't really know what Peace Corps is. Can you explain to us what is Peace Corps and like the whole process behind it?
Sure, yeah. The Peace Corps is a department of the American government, and they send volunteers to countries that invite them. And basically these volunteers work in development and in like cultural exchange, sort of like a less formal diplomacy. That's kind of the way I see it. So yeah, I was a volunteer in Macedonia where I worked in a couple of rural schools in the central part of Macedonia.
Oh, great. So considering we know that you were in Bogomila for a very long time, teaching as an English teacher. How did you decide to go into Peace Corps, and how was your experience in Macedonia? Just give us a general overview and your thoughts on the country.
Well, the Peace Corps was kind of a way for me to have really a big privilege to travel and learn a different culture and another language. I had gone to school to be a teacher, but for almost 4 years, I didn't use my degree, and I wanted to get back into it. And I also wanted to travel and experience a different place. So I applied for the Peace Corps. It's a long process, although it has gotten shorter, I think. And at first I was going to be sent to Armenia, because I did not mind where they sent me, as long as it wasn't like an island in the middle of the Pacific. And they were going to send me to Armenia, and I said, great. They moved some things around, and they put me in Macedonia, and I was really happy about that. Macedonia is like my second home. That's what I've always said to people. Amazing culture, amazing people. I met some people that changed my life, and it's something that I'll never forget.
Yeah, so you selected you're put on a plane, you get to Macedonia. What's the process next? Do you go straight to your place that you're going to be working and serving, or what's happening after you land in Skopje?
So the first thing I did when I landed in Skopje was I made a comment about how hot it was there. The volunteers, when they arrive, they go through about 3 months of training. A lot of that training is language, but it's also cultural, to kind of understand the context in which you're working. And there's also technical training. So they put me in Negotino, a small town, which I loved, and they put me with a host family. And I was really lucky with them, and I'm still very close with them. The last time I visited Macedonia, which was almost a year ago, of course I went to go see them. So after your training, you are actually a volunteer, and they send you to what's called your site, which is like your permanent place for the next 2 years. And they sent me to a small village outside of Veles. Well, not really outside of Veles, between Veles and Prilep, called Bogomila, where I worked in a very, very small school.
Great. So because like we've known you, we talked to you, you know, when you were here, you were really great with your Macedonian.
Thank you.
How long did it take you to adapt, and can we hear some good old Macedonian from you once again?
Može. So when I first got to Macedonia, I had never learned a foreign language from the ground up. That's a problem with Americans. Is a lot of Americans, they just don't learn a language. They don't travel. They're kind of privileged because English is so universal. So it was slow for me at first. This was also combined with the fact that my host family, there was a lot of English and a lot of very good English, and they were more keen on practicing their English with me than teaching me Macedonian. That changed when I got to my site, though, because there was almost no English there. There were 2 guys that lived in the village that did speak English, but it took me a while for me to meet them. It took me almost 2 months. So I was immersed in the language, and I would say after about like 9 months of being in the country, I spoke Macedonian fluently. Not perfect, but enough to hold a conversation with the babas and the dedovci. My Macedonian now is not very good. I can still read it, but speaking it's quite hard for me. I don't use it in Thailand.
Which means another visit to Macedonia is supposed to be planned.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking about coming next month. This is before COVID, messed everything up. Now I don't plan past what I'm having for dinner. But I had a friend of mine who is Bulgarian, and he was going to be married in Plovdiv, and I was going to, after his wedding, I was going to visit some folks in Skopje, but that's out of the question now.
Yeah, so I've lived abroad for a year, and I know when I got to Texas, in my case, there were some things that made me think, wow, this is really different than what I'd known before. So speaking of the cultural shocks, can you tell us a few things that, you got to your site, you got to meet your Baba and Dedo and like people in the village. What was that something that made you think like, wow, this is so different than everything I've had before?
Oh, that's a very good question. I guess for me, what struck me very hard was kind of the less directness that a lot of people showed me, where, like Americans by and large are very, we kind of say what's on our mind, and we try to be as like straightforward as possible. And something that I kind of struggled with at first was like, I really wanted to be like involved in like the family and the community. I wanted to show them that I cared. And it was kind of like, it felt to me at first like everyone was just kind of like, oh, you don't want any part of this. Like you're not one of us. Like, you don't need to be working on the farm or working in the garden or anything like that. The way I overcame that was I just kind of like persisted and got better at the language, and showed them that I wasn't here for vacation, and eventually they started to accept me. But the first 3 months were really hard. It was also winter too. That was tough.
Considering the timeline when Peace Corps volunteers arrive in country, it's pretty much winter at that point.
Yeah, I'll never forget when I went to when I first moved to Bogomila a few weeks after we had Badnik, and my host brother, he would never tell me where we were going. He would just kind of take me around like I was like an annoying little brother, which is probably accurate. He would just tell me, I'd ask him like where we're going, and he'd say, "Oh, Nagore," and it was so confusing to me. I was like, "We're going up where?" Like, and so he took me to this bonfire for Bodnik. I'm standing around and I don't know anybody. It's just snow, cold. Everyone's drinking wine and rakia and talking to each other. I'm just standing there like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I approach these old guys, these dedos, and I start speaking my very elementary Macedonian. And then all of a sudden, one of these dedos starts speaking English to me, like pretty good English too. And I said, "Wait, like, am I drunk or something?" And he's like, "No, I used to live in America for like 20 years. I used to live in New York." And so he's like retired and he moved back to his hometown. It's very cool.
Yeah, so from my experience with Peace Corps volunteers, I know that when I was younger and like I would meet them, and you briefly touched on that, like my thing was that I wanted to talk in English with them. I didn't really care about their Macedonian. I wanted to kind of practice my English.
Yeah.
And like you go into the school, how's that working out? Like, is it easier for you with like younger kids, or even they wanted to be like work on their English? And with your colleagues as well, like, can you like tell us like how was your school life, I guess, in Macedonia?
Yeah. Okay. So there was really no my students were not all terribly interested in learning English. And it's understandable. They didn't really have a practical reason, and it wasn't really it wasn't sold to them. Like, so it was just kind of something that they did. My counterparts were both very nice, and they spoke English, but they were more interested in like including me in like the Macedonian side of things. So I actually ended up spending most of my time chatting with them in Macedonian and learning about how things work in Macedonian schools. The way I kind of got the kids on my side was, I didn't really make it about learning English. I made it about like being creative and finding different ways to express themselves. So I did lots of art projects and things to help like clean up the community. There was a lot of trash in my village, and if you've ever been to that part of Macedonia, it's known for its like natural beauty. And it was always a shame to see plastic bottles and stuff like that everywhere. So that's how I did it. And to this day, the kids don't really speak English very much, and that's okay with me. So.
Yeah, so we met at a youth camp, YMLP, Young Men's Leadership Project, and one of the things I remember specifically about you, and when we were talking with Nikola about this interview, I said we got to talk about his footwear in Macedonia. So can you tell us what's that all about?
I inherited a pair of Cheap Kumanovo from my baba. She gave them to me initially for shower shoes, but I said, I gotta wear these. These are so cool. And so I just wore them everywhere. I even brought them to Thailand. And then I left them on my front porch. and some dogs took them away. I was so sad. And when I went back to Macedonia, I looked all over and I couldn't find a pair. I guess the factory's closed or something. But I told my baba that the dogs took my Chick Kumanovo, and she just shook her head. Yeah.
Philip.
Yeah, she was not happy about it. I brought them to the beach in Thailand too. I think I posted a picture when I moved here, and all my Macedonian friends, including you, Nikola, were just texting me like, "Holy shit!" Oh, excuse me. Can I curse on here?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, well, the Chikumano are definitely a travel footwear. Speaking of YMLP and Youth in Macedonia, can you just um, give us your thoughts on young people here, since you work with some young people, including ourselves at YMLP? You know, where do you see young people in Macedonia going? Well, at least when you were here.
Like how things are going.
Oh yeah, your thoughts on young people.
Well, like I love you guys, like you guys in YMLP, and not just YMLP and Glow kids, but like some of the other students that I met in like Velis, and some of the high school and university students who would come back home to Bugomila. You know, I really bonded with them in ways that I think that I wouldn't. Like you guys taught me a lot about the country and the situation. And you know, it's really great that there are a lot of like leadership opportunities, but like I think that it's kind of like an incomplete picture without like, you know, material support and betterment, right? Like, I mean, it's no mystery that like the population, especially younger people of Macedonia, is declining, and a lot of that is because of opportunity and lack thereof. So it's really inspiring to see young people who like really want to like make a change and a difference. I just wish that there was like the other side of that, you know, like more material benefits, higher salaries, better infrastructure, things like that.
Yeah, and like speaking of young people, like speaking of YMLP, it's like, can you like, I mean, we haven't really talked about YMLP on this podcast when we were doing it in Macedonia, but like, can you like to those that are listening right now, and hopefully there are many, but like, can you like let us know like what was your like, why did you decide to kind of join this camp and like help out with doing it, and like what was your like best like one best story from YMLP?
Well, initially I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to take a break from teaching. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. When I was working at YMLP camp, I taught classes on environmentalism, and I also did an elective about historical thinking and about how different historical interpretations can really change, you know, a story. But initially I didn't want to do that. I wanted to kind of just take a break from being a teacher, and I wanted to be like a counselor. But they put me as a teacher, and I'm glad that I did that. It was a lot of fun for me. It was just, it gave me kind of a unique, opportunity there, because, I could communicate with younger people in my native language. So they could like kind of understand me a little bit more. Yeah, my favorite part of it was actually teaching that elective. And it was just great to hear like some of the campers saying, wow, I like didn't really like history and reading history. I thought it was boring. And like you kind of changed my mind on that, and I'm going to start looking into it. I was like, hey, that's great. You know, it's really important to study history.
So, considering you're a historian by major, you know, and we have this the talks on the fascinating history of the Balkans. Like, what is so fascinating to you about history, and what is and are you sort of interested in like Balkan history? Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah. Well, my love of history comes from a very primal origin. I just really like stories. You know, I like hearing lore and stuff that happens, and I think that's something that like most people like. Most people like stories. That's like the more simple component of it. I think history is very important to understand, not just because of the, you don't make the same mistakes of the past. It's to do justice by telling the truth and by understanding that when you whitewash a history or sometimes outright lie about something, that you are doing a disservice to the people who are alive today, but you're also doing a huge disservice to a lot of people who, did not, who had something bad happen to them. So that's like the more serious part of it is making sure that the narrative is not tainted and that you understand the context in which the narrative comes from. Balkan history, I'll be honest with you. I had a really hard time finding sources that I thought were, not heavily biased. A lot of the reading that you do about Balkan history, particularly of Yugoslavia, is very, like at least the sources that are in English, is very slanted towards NATO and the West. And that kind of made it a little hard for me to like really kind of consider myself super knowledgeable. I think it's really interesting, but I'm still very much an amateur when it comes to understanding the history of the Balkan region.
Yeah, so like speaking of history, and I've had a professor on one of the very first episodes, so I asked him this question, and I wanted to ask you this question as well. Mm-hmm. Like, especially like during like, it's true for a Balkan region, but I think it's also true for all over the world that countries and political elites and like just the whole political structures are using history for their own narrative. So mm-hmm. like, how should one, like in your opinion as a historian, something that you study, how should one consume history? Like, why is it so important, and how should we act knowing our history, or is it important that much for the present and the future?
Well, I think it's important to look at not just the events of history. That's not history. Like history is not like a series of static events. It is interconnected, and it's part of a bigger story. So how should one consume history? One should consume it like you would a story. Where is it coming from? Who are the characters? What are their motivations? Who is benefiting from something like this? And keep in mind that when you are studying the history of a country, whatever country that may be, or the history of a people, the fundamental question for me is always, what does it mean to be somebody in this time, in this place? It's, for me, I think people should consume history in like a people's history, and not think of it like this monolithic, this is the history of China. Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. And you would have to look at the different ways that the narrative is being brought about.
Yeah, so you finish your term in Macedonia, mm-hmm. and what's next? How do you decide to go to Thailand and teach there?
Well, it was really kind of random. I was like, well, I don't want to move back home, permanently. I still want to teach abroad. So I just, I went on like a jobs board for English teaching jobs, thinking I would only do it for maybe a year or two. I got hired at this school in Surat Thani. And it's an international school, but it was not what it seemed at first. It was quite a it's still very much a developing place, and that was really exciting, and that's what made me stay initially. I also I have a girlfriend who I'm pretty serious with. We've been together for a year and a half, and so that's another good reason to stay. Yeah, so it was just totally random. Like, they hired me and I said, okay, I'm going to Thailand.
Well, since you're in Thailand now, and especially since it's the coronavirus pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
And from a perspective of a teacher, especially one that teaches elementary school kids, like, how is teaching different in the times of COVID-19?
Oh, well, it's completely different. Like, the teaching online is like, it's not totally useless. The thing is with teaching online is you don't have the same controls, and you don't have the same physical proximity, and it really kind of shows you how much like humans need that sort of like nonverbal communication, right? Even just placement in the classroom can make a huge difference. So yeah, it's just not as structured. It's not as natural. It's not my forte. I will be the first to admit that I am not as effective teaching online as I am in the classroom. It also depends a lot. Like, online teaching is not as flexible. Like, I think you have to have like a well-designed course and curriculum from the get-go. Whereas if you're teaching in a physical brick and mortar school, you still make lesson plans, obviously, and you go in there with a game plan and some alternatives. But if you can kind of suss out that, like, oh, the kids aren't getting it, or or the other way around, it's too easy, you can change things up in the moment. Can't really do that online because it's much more rigid.
Yep. So,
And like, also, like, sorry, like, also, like, little kids, it's just not natural for little kids to be staring at a screen all day. I don't know what they're going to do if this continues.
yeah, I agree with you there. And I don't think the situation is much better here in Macedonia.
Mm-hmm.
But coming back to Macedonia, you said like the first thing you noticed about Skopje was that it was so hot. So what was the first thought that you had when you landed in Thailand?
My first thought was, like, I thought Skopje was hot. This is way hotter. But also, like, it's not like Surat Thani. Like, right now, it's during the day, it's on average it's between 33 and 35, and that's hot. But like, it's a different kind of heat because it's closer to the equator. So the sun is like way more intense. So it feels much hotter than even like a hot day in the center of Skopje.
Yeah, beside your teaching job, I mean, now we're kind of talking more like before COVID-19. It's like Thailand is a huge country compared to Macedonia, and like, were you like, have you explored it some, or like what, like if someone wants to go to Thailand after all this is over, what would you say to them?
Oh man, there's so much to see. Yeah, I spent some time in the north in 3 places: Bangkok, Ayutthaya, and Chiang Mai. And Chiang Mai is where I am moving next month. Bangkok is a city of like 20 million people. Yep, 20 million. It's really big, and it's very overwhelming at first. There's a lot of just great, like, kind of historical, cultural monuments there. There's just like just a lot of street markets, and it's just like a lot of stimulation at one time. Ayutthaya is kind of like the let me see if I can draw a slight parallel. It's kind of like the ancient Rome of like that part of Asia. Like, that's like although it's not as old, it's like one of the first, or not one of the first, it's like one of the best preserved old kingdoms of Thailand. So that's worth seeing. Other parts like Thailand is a very diverse country. There's different language groups and there's different cultures within the country depending on the region, just like any other place, right? So if you go to like the south where I live, the local language is actually completely different than Bangkok Thai. Although most people also use the Bangkok Thai in like business transactions and things like that. The food is different. The geography is different. So yeah, it's there's so much to see. I could spend the whole podcast just talking about places to visit in Thailand, honestly.
So how would you recommend for the best experience travel wise in terms of mode of transportation? Would you recommend a bike or bus or what?
Oh, oof. Depends where you are. If you're in Bangkok, definitely take what's called a tuk-tuk, which is kind of like it's kind of like a mini taxi. They also have public transportation, but if you're in a place like where I live in Surat Thani, which is like a medium-sized town, you would have to rent like a scooter, like a Vespa or something, to get around because they don't have a lot of public transportation options.
Yeah, and in terms of food, like you've been in Macedonia, you've tasted our food. You're in Thailand's food. What's better? I mean, not to put you on the spot now, but like.
Oh boy. Well, I have to be careful with a lot of Thai food because I'm allergic to shellfish, and a lot of Thai food has crab or shrimp, particularly powdered shrimp that's put in some of the curry. But it was one of the first things I learned to say in Thai is I'm allergic to seafood. And they kind of understood that. The food in Thailand is spicy. That's the first thing I would notice. It's spicy, and there's a lot of coconut, a lot of citrus, a lot of ginger, and a lot of curry. The main like carbohydrate, like most of Asia, is rice. And there's more to rice than you think. There's like lots of different types and different types of rice for different types of dishes. The food in the north and in the south is different. In the south, the food tends to be a lot spicier and a lot more coconut heavy. Makes sense because of the climate. Compared to Macedonian food, Macedonian food is delicious, but it is not spicy. It's there's no better or worse. It's just totally different. Something I do miss a lot in Thailand is just like bread and cheese. That's like not really a big culinary thing here. And actually a lot of Thai people don't like cheese. It's interesting.
So no shopska for you there, right?
No shopska. You can get cheese and it's very expensive actually for the quality and for the amount. So yeah, I miss my burek. I miss my skara. Like one of the first things I got when I came back to the Balkans was actually I landed in Serbia first. First thing, once I put my bag down in my hotel, was I ran around the corner and I got a paskavica. I had to.
You gotta do it. You gotta do it. Speaking of Thailand, speaking of Macedonia, let's jump across the Atlantic, or in your case, across the Pacific, and check out the USA. So I think, as far as I remember, you're originally from around the DC area in Virginia. Yes. So you were here, I think, during the 2016 elections still?
Yeah, I remember where I was when I found out that Donald Trump was the president. I was drinking Turkish coffee in my teacher's lounge. And one of the teachers came in and he was kind of like ironically a Trump supporter. And I mean, he didn't really know what he was talking about. He came in and he goes, Trump, pobedi. I was like, oh, shit.
I feel like, yeah, everyone was like that at that point. So right now, the US is facing another election, hopefully in November, unless some things happen.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on the newest discourse on the elections?
Well, I mean, You have to break it into parts, I think. I mean, it's no mystery where my political leanings lie. I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I think, well, let's start with the Democrats. So what's happened with the so-called resistance in the United States? They threw everything they had to try to stop Sanders, even though he's a very popular politician and his policy proposals are popular amongst working people. The fact of the matter is that to the Democrats, he represents a threat to their status quo and their corporate hegemony. It's not really a mystery. They didn't. It wasn't like a conspiracy either. It was no secret. But where was I going to go with that? The problem with the left in America is, Sanders is a great politician. He's a great guy. I respect him a lot. It was the first and only time I've ever donated to a campaign. But one of the problems with the progressives is they don't really know how to argue when a Democrat or a Republican says, you guys are socialists. That's a 4-letter word in the United States. It's becoming more acceptable, but like what they never said was like, yeah, we're socialists and this is what socialism means to like voters, right? It means free healthcare. It means access to higher education. It means the right to have a home. It means all of these things. They didn't really make it so concrete. They kind of dodged it because they were scared of being perceived as too radical. Even though if you look at Sanders's proposal, it's kind of standard for any EU country. It's kind of like a duh. Like, yeah, you need to have a national health system. So what's going on right now is, I mean, it's not just that. Like, I think Biden, assuming that he's still the nominee, it's not just because people don't like Bernie. It's also because a lot of people are very scared and traumatized by a Trump presidency, which is a shame because it shows a real lack of historical memory. I mean, Trump is really kind of he's not as much of an anomaly as you think he is. It's just because he says things in a less polished way. I mean, if we were alive in 1980 and you listen to Reagan's campaign speeches, it would sound almost identical to something Trump would say. But a lot of people are just scared of another 4 years of Trump. And so they're going to go with the safe option. That's never worked for the Democrats ever in their whole electoral history.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, like people are scared, but does that mean that Biden actually has a chance against Trump? I mean, just historically speaking, incumbent presidents have a very high percentage of winning the re-election after their first term. And a lot of people that are on the Sanders side, they're considering not to vote for Biden because of these issues that you've said, because of the status quo and just the open pay against Sanders from the establishment, from the media, from everyone that was scared, that is scared from him, maybe even more than Trump. So would that lead to just another 4 years of Trump?
Well, it's really hard to say. I've never really been in the business of political prediction making. And honestly, all those people that predicted that Trump would lose in 2016, they're still making predictions. And they were so wrong. So, I mean, I am not in the camp that like a Biden nomination equals another 4 years of Trump. It could happen. It could not. Let's look at the different things that kind of tip the scales. Trump has a lot of gifts that the Democrats gave him. Russiagate, right? I mean, just recently, Michael Flynn was exonerated, right? The Russiagate thing is a complete fabrication that the establishment Democrats, spent over 3 years trying to find some sort of evidence of collusion between Trump and the Russian government, and it just didn't exist. So Russiagate is a huge gift to Trump. His failed impeachment, huge gift. And Joe Biden himself is also a huge gift to Trump because he's weak in ways that are a lot more critical than even Clinton was weak in 2016. His dubious past, particularly with being on the side of NAFTA and big corporations, his incessant lying about almost everything in his life, and of course his very clear case of what I think is just cognitive decline. He can't form a sentence and doesn't seem to know where he is half the time. If you think that Trump is going to be civil with that, that's just, you're delusional. He's going to eat him up. Weighing the other side is COVID, right? The way the U.S. government has handled this is, it's criminal. And, they are empowering these armed protesters who want to go eat at a Baskin Robbins, for crying out loud. And they acted like it wasn't there. They try to blame China. Meanwhile, there's, I think, almost 90,000 people have died. And it's slowing down a little bit right now, but, it's not anywhere near concluding. So anything could happen. I don't think Trump is a shoo-in, but I also don't think that Biden is a shoo-in.
And so we have to see in November, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and like the convention for the Democrats is not even over yet. They might decide, Biden's too much of a liability, we'll put someone else in there. I mean, if it would be my guess, they'll put another centrist in there. There's no way they would pony up for Bernie.
Well, what about Hillary?
Oh no, if Hillary becomes the nominee in 2020, I don't know. I think the Matrix is just going to break. I can't imagine why they would think that's a good idea, but you never know, because the Democrats just have this, they have such a defeatist outlook towards politics, And if you want, I can go into that as to why I think that is. But they have such a defeatist outlook towards politics that they shame the progressives and the left in America into voting for them, which has never worked. You're not going to shame me to vote for Biden. I mean, I will never tell anyone how to vote. It's none of my business, and it's, in my opinion, mostly a symbolic act anyway. But this idea of you have to vote for Biden because he's the lesser of two evils it's just not a winning strategy, and it's never proved to be a good one for the Democrats in their past.
Speaking of the lesser of two evils and sort of the defeatist mentality, considering Bernie Sanders has officially dropped out of the campaign, even though he's still on the ballot in most states, where do you see the leadership of the progressive side of the Democratic Party, or rather the progressive side of the U.S. in general, is heading towards? What kind of leadership is needed to bring a much more stronger progressive wing of the American political spectrum, and of course, considering now that with Bernie Sanders out of the picture, well, mostly there is an opening of debate, especially through some actions that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took in her time in the House. So where do you see the leadership strategy going forward for the progressives?
Well, I think it's very promising to see that there are, open socialists that hold elected office. AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. but there's like three, and they still kind of cling on to this idea of electoral politics is the only way to go, right? I think they need to change that. I think electoral politics is important. You do have to have people rallies and kind of get behind a movement and organize some policy proposals. I'm saying that's important, but you also have to have another side of that. You have to have activists. You have to have people that take direct action. You have to have labor organizers. You have to have people to organize strikes and to create petitions. The left doesn't have that yet. I think they're working on it, but it's very, very, very small, and it's insufficient. Another problem that plagues the left, and this is kind of a historical problem, is just differences of identity. Are you a communist? Are you a socialist? What kind of socialist? Are you an anarchist? That stuff has got to stop. And what needs to happen is a more concrete, on the ground, direct action labor organization paired with political activism too. And also they really need to drop that D next to their name and, admit that the Democratic Party is not the party of the workers anymore. And it would be wise to form their own party too, I think.
Yeah, so there are lots of parties in the U.S., but Republican and the Democratic Party are just the two mainstream that kind of have monopoly over the whole political spectrum. And let's say they form a party, Democratic Socialists of America. What would be can they really hurt the Democratic Party by doing that? And how would that work?
Well, that's a very good question, and I can't answer with 100% certainty, but I would say that if the Democrats continue down this road, and it might happen after this election, there has to be a split. People like Joe Biden and Clinton and John Kerry and Tim Kaine, those guys aren't standing up for working people. They're corporatists, and they are, for all intents and purposes, those guys are just moderate Republicans. And that has been the strategy of the Democrats since the Reagan years. I think it needs to split, but it's not ever going to be effective if there's not mass movements that don't just put all of its stock into electoralism. You have to demonstrate to bosses and landlords and big companies that unless you start treating people more fairly, you're going to lose your workforce. Your wealth is dependent on our production.
So in terms of electoral politics, I also feel in this primary season, we've also seen headbutting between the two, what are considered the two most progressive people in Congress right now, which is Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Do you feel like Warren betrayed somewhat the Bernie Sanders, firstly back in 2016 when she didn't endorse him, but also right now running against them and actively running negative?
Well, Elizabeth Warren has terrible political instincts. Going back to the Pow Wow Chow book and this whole getting tricked into doing race science by Donald Trump. She might be considered a progressive, and she is progressive on some issues, but I don't think she falls into the same camp as someone like Sanders or the Squad. And she's not on their side, so I wouldn't say that she betrayed them. I would say that she was acting like an opponent would. She's just very bad at it. The Warren campaign they just kind of shot their wad when they tried to get Sanders on a sexist comment that nobody heard, and there were no witnesses. They just said, I can't even recall the details. It was just he allegedly said that a woman can't be the president, even though no one heard him say it. And what happened to that? It just fizzled into the wind, and Warren finished like third in her home state on Super Tuesday. So
yeah, in Massachusetts.
Yeah. So she didn't betray him. She just was his opponent.
Yeah, like you touched upon like Trump and like his rhetorics, and I mean, frankly, how he became president in 2016 is, and like I want to go a little bit back. And you said that your colleague teacher broke you the news that Trump is the new president, and like I'm sure you've seen it when you were in Macedonia, but like, and I mean, it's my kind of realization that a lot of people here are like Trump, and like wanted to ask you, why do you think that is? Why do you think like Macedonians would like Trump, and like, or anyone else for that matter, or and how he became this like politician that he is today?
Well, from what I saw, a lot of people like Trump because they really didn't like Clinton. They saw Clinton as, a representative of, well, she's Bill Clinton's wife, of somebody who attacked Serbia. So a lot of people just heard the name, and they didn't like Trump because of anything that he does and says. They like Trump because he's not a war hawk. At least he wasn't a war hawk in his rhetoric in 2016. Actually, he was very anti-war, which was kind of appealing to a lot of people too. Macedonia was not so viciously attacked as Serbia was, but it's my understanding that Macedonians feel very culturally and historically close to Serbs, and so watching an all-out attack, especially on civilian places like hospitals and television stations, was seen as, and rightfully so, as just overly aggressive, and America extending its power when it need not.
And like following up and like leading up to this election 2020, like we can all agree that another 4 years of Trump, it's not just going to be bad for the US, but probably for the entire world, as we've seen how he's handling the whole pandemic situation. And then we've talked about how the progressives and like the Democratic Party really cannot get their act together, which could lead to 4 more years of Trump. So in your opinion, what would 4 more years of Trump look like, and what would be the impact of it?
It would be, to take a stab at it, it would be just hell world. Like, have you ever seen Wall-E? Like, we're going towards that world, where it's just the planet is uninhabitable and people are kind of incapacitated, maybe not physically, but like they don't have any control over the situation. It's another 4 years of Trump would be a disaster, but primarily because of his very blatant attempts to cut back on environmental regulations. I mean, that's the big thing. Trump hasn't started like a new war somewhere. He does disastrous trade deals. He's kind of jabbing at China. But, in my opinion, a lot of the real damage is environmental. And then, of course, within the United States, a huge upward just transfer of wealth by tax cuts and other deregulation. It's going to be horrible. Sorry.
Yeah, like, and like you said it before, like if we start going like down the path of like discussing this even more, we can do another 2 hours or 3 hours of the
Yeah.
podcast, and but like something that let's get back to like the Peace Corps and kind of like connect it with
Mm-hmm.
politics. I want to
Mm-hmm.
like because I know that I mean from just meeting you guys and like talking to a lot of Peace Corps volunteers that have been in Macedonia, I know that there are certain rules and like you can't really openly speak about U.S. politics when you are a Peace Corps volunteer. So how is that for you? Like I mean, we know you like you are very like open about your political beliefs and what you
Mm-hmm.
stand for, and like connected with like the Peace Corps experience. Like how is that like limitation going for you?
Well, it was a little hard for me, to say the least. The policy was not to shy away from U.S. politics. The policy was to shy away from Macedonian politics. So I could talk about the U.S. all I wanted, but and by shying away from Macedonian politics, I read that as don't take an official position, don't express your official position, and don't be seen doing anything like political. And that's wise. Um, so a lot of what, like the way I handled it was I just, answered a lot of questions that Macedonians had to me about U.S. politics, particularly about foreign policy, which was very interesting. And I would just listen and ask open-ended questions without kind of taking a side about what they thought of the political situation in Macedonia. Now I'm no longer a volunteer, so I don't have to worry about any of that. I can say whatever I want.
Freedom. Yeah, so as we sort of wrap up the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a good question to ask would be, what would be your recommendation for young people as they sort of grow into a world which is sort of completely changed from whatever the past normal might have been, especially post COVID-19. So,
Mm-hmm.
what would be something that you would advise young people to do?
Remember that nothing happens in a vacuum, that there is always a context, and we are part of something greater. It's never just going to be about this election. It's never just going to be about this gaffe. It's never going to be about just this. It's a big picture thing. Use your skills, use your company, and by company I mean the people around you, to organize and stand up for average people. What's happening now in the world with COVID-19 is it presents an unprecedented economic vulnerability. It just highlights how gross the inequality is, not just in the United States, all over the world. And now is the time to remember that and try to apply what we know and what we're good at to put pressure on those that are in power. I'll use the Marxist word, those that own the means of production, to press for better treatment and for reforms. I think that's where it starts. But it starts at it starts at an organizational level first. It's not going to be this huge monolithic thing. That's what I think.
Yeah, thank you, and just thank you for the time that you gave us and like the conversation that we've had. I look at the clock; it's been already an hour, and I feel like this is a good place to kind of wrap it up on a positive note, kind of encouraging note.
Yeah.
And what we do, I mean, yes, we're in COVID-19, we're all locked down, and like we can't really leave our homes, but we can change things when all of this is over. But anyways, what are we like doing with all our guests so far, especially during this time in quarantine, is asking them to give us a few recommendations, whether that's a movie or a book or TV shows or even a hobby that they might pick up. So like you mentioned before the conversation that you've read a lot of books and you've watched a lot of Netflix. So what would Phil's recommendation be for our listeners and for ourselves to kind of check them out?
For books, I just finished a Steinbeck novel called In Dubious Battle. And if you have read Steinbeck, you know that he is a very famous American author who wrote about migrant workers in the Great Depression. Steinbeck was no leftist, but he really just made a great like portrayal of how hard it was to be a farm worker in the 1930s. In terms of podcasts, I can recommend some good politics podcasts. One is called Useful Idiots. It's by Matt Taibbi and I forget his co-host's name. But Matt Taibbi is a great journalist who has written specifically about Russiagate and about the 2008 financial crisis. Excellent journalist. I recommend the comedy podcast Chapo Trap House if you haven't heard of them. They are just a hilarious group of guys that like met on Twitter or something, and they do a weekly show about just all the weird and crazy things that happen in American politics. Netflix, I just am rewatching a lot of old stuff because I think TV most of the time is trash, and it's just a way for me to turn my brain off.
Thank you, Phil. And
yeah.
I mean, do you have anything to ask us before we say goodbye, or
what are you guys doing? Like, are you just hanging out at home?
I mean, we're doing the podcast, apparently.
Yeah.
We're actually doing a lot of work with the University Student Assembly. So we're just trying to get that up on its feet, which, from what I've seen, it's going great so far.
Awesome.
But staying in quarantine and preparing for exams coming up soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
No, I was just gonna say that it looks in Macedonia that like the measures are kind of like loosening up, and I think starting tomorrow we can even like be more outside, and like for me as like a baseball fanatic, and like I finally found a baseball team in Macedonia and we were registering it, so we're becoming official. And
that's great.
Starting next week we might be actually able to do some practices outside. So like doing the podcast, hopefully doing baseball, and I mean, just like trying to find ways to stay sane during this period, definitely.
Are you guys both in Skopje right now, or are you guys back home?
We're actually back home, but we're going to Skopje soon enough next week.
Yeah, this is like our last day back home, and I'm getting to Skopje tomorrow. I think Nikola is getting to Skopje tomorrow, so he kind of caught us in like hometown life right now.
Yeah. I'm glad that you guys are safe, and I want to say like this is really good what you guys are doing. It's a great project. I would listen more. It's a little hard for me to understand it sometimes because again my Macedonian is very rusty, but I think it's really cool, and thanks for inviting me on the show. I hope I don't tank your listenership.
Oh no, we're definitely gonna invite you again, especially like kind of like in the build up to November if that election happens, or after, like to tell us what has happened and like what are your thoughts on it. But thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you for talking to us. And I mean, now that we'll have English episodes, you can listen even more, and hopefully we can get some other Peace Corps volunteers or other people that have been in Macedonia that are now not here to talk about more their experience and just stuff that interests them. And yeah, like for our listeners, we're gonna release these episodes I think every 2 weeks. Hopefully it'll be like during the weekend, and we'll go from there. We'll see how it goes. We're gonna continue with our regular Macedonian podcast episodes every Wednesday and talk about politics and some other stuff that we think of. So you guys stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks again for having me. You guys be well, and just let you know when I'm coming to Macedonia. We'll have a beer or something.
Yeah, and we'll try to get you that Chikumanolo
Yeah.
for a year.
I'll tell you my size. Cool. Okay. It's been great, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Bye. Ciao.